Yeah, Andrew Yang. Good to speak to you, my friend.
Hey, Adam. Great to be here. Sorry it took so long. I've been intended to have this conversation a little while ago.
Well, you know, shit happens, as they say on the campaign trail, but here we are. Better late than never. All right, we're just rolling on this, so we might as well get to getting. I know your time is valuable. I like what you said. You dropped out of the race, but you're pledging we're just getting started. What does that mean?
Well, my campaign's predicated on the fact that our economy is being changed in fundamental ways. More and more Americans are going to have a harder time trading their time and labor for money, and that we need to make progress in how we get buying power into people's hands in new and different ways, and start recognizing some of the work that's being done that the market right now ignores. So, though my campaign officially is suspended, and I will say I'm on the ballot of something like 40-something states, so I think I'm going to still get a lot of votes. But we're continuing to make the case for this set of solutions. I'm going to be in the public eye very much over the coming days and weeks. And the goal is to keep advancing things like the freedom dividend and a different way of measuring our economic progress in the days to come, and then potentially run again.
I was thinking about your freedom dividend, so let's just start with the most prominent part of your campaign. Now, my first impulse was I don't like the government giving anyone anything for free. That was my first impulse. And then as I heard you talk about it, and you were talking about tech companies and how they were profiting off of you and your information, and you weren't being compensated, then I had to sort of look at it a different way, which is, okay, if these billionaires are making money off of you and they're not sharing any of it with you, well, then it's not free money from the government. It's sort of being paid for services rendered to some degree. So I sort of, that whole part is correct?
Yeah, that's 100% right, Adam.
And then I started thinking, well, I don't really need the $1,000 personally. I mean, I'll take it, but I have enough money. What about the people who don't need the money, like me and my Hollywood friends? What could we do? Could we kick it to somebody? Could we put it towards something? What about the people that make over $500,000 a year or $250,000 a year? Could theirs go somewhere else? And then on the bottom end, what about the people who don't have health insurance? Could that money go directly to their health insurance versus just into their checking accounts? Thoughts?
Well, to the first, of course, you can do whatever you'd like with the dividend. You can say, look, I don't need it. You could say, I'm going to take it and then I'm going to give it to this person who needs it a lot more, give it to charity, give it to the government, which would essentially be not claiming it.
Right.
So that's one aspect, is that it's opt-in. As you suggest, most people would probably happily opt in for the dividend and then give it to their favorite cause. But it's completely in your hands whether you want it or not, and then what you do with it afterwards.
Would you make that? I guess what I'm saying is versus me saying, I'll opt in, give me $1,000, I'm going to put it in the March of Dimes receptacle at the 7-Eleven once a month, or would there be an easier fast-track way of doing it, such as I'm giving it to LA Unified School District, and I can just check a box, and it would just go there, or I'm giving it to Caltrans, or I'm giving it to, Doctors Without Borders. Like, could we make it easy just to sort of automate it on the government side, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. You could opt in and then just choose a cause or organization that you want the money to go to, and then they'd receive it, and then you could make a similar election the following year. It'd be a lot of fun. You could be like, hey, maybe this year I'll go a different direction with a donation. I think Americans would enjoy this a great deal.
And then on the lower end, when I was talking about so many people that don't have health insurance and they're getting $1,000, should it be allocated toward that if, in fact, you're uninsured?
Well, this is a whole nother ball of wax that I think is one of the big themes of this election. I'm going to tell a story from Iowa where I've spent some time recently. So I was with a family doctor in rural Iowa, and he said to me that we need to not have health insurance tied to your job because what happens in his town in Iowa is that someone gets sick, and then after they get sick, they can't show up to work anymore, so then they lose their job, and then they lose their health insurance, which is tied to the job. And at this point, they have a hard time getting the treatment they need for whatever sickness or illness they have. And so then they sign up for some kind of Medicaid or Social Security disability, but that stuff takes a while to kick in. And he said they typically die before their new insurance kicks in because they have something that got them out of the workforce in the first place. And so if it goes untreated for a number of months while the bureaucracy's wheels are turning, a lot of time they don't make it. I heard this story and I was like, well, this is terrible. I mean, that sounds like the worst of all worlds. And a lot of this is based on an historical accident where the reason why our health insurance is tied to our jobs is because during World War II, the government set pay caps on companies that you can't pay people over a certain level. And then those companies went out and said, well, I'll give people health insurance. And so it's not compensation. And so they went around the rule to try and attract workers when there weren't many workers around. And then as a result, we've had this strange hodgepodge of a system where our health insurance is often bolted onto our job. Yeah. And we're the only country in the world that has that situation. Really? It actually is immensely destructive to have your health insurance tied to your job on so many levels.
Well, a side note, you may know this, but maybe listeners don't. Kaiser, as in Kaiser Permanente, the, biggest hospital in the United States, Kaiser, speaking of World War II, started building ships. Kaiser built Liberty ships. They built troop transports. That was their business. They were in a shipbuilding industry and they had so many employees that they had to build a hospital for all the welders and all the workers they had to crank out these massive troop transport Liberty ships. They were cranking them out in like 3 days per unit, these 500-foot vessels at the end of the war. So Kaiser of Kaiser Shipbuilding.
Permanente, like the giant HMO.
Yeah. It's interesting that World War II was, maybe they started it off, I don't know, but they took all their employees and they built a giant hospital and they went, because if you employ 20,000 welders, there's going to be some issues. You're going to need a facility. So that's all tying back to this notion, but sorry. Continue.
No, not at all. I mean, that's fascinating. And so what we need to do is we need to get health coverage to people independent of your employment. And this is crucial because of the Iowa doctor story, but it's also crucial because imagine all of the people who've considered taking a different job or maybe even starting their own business, doing something independent, and then froze in their tracks because then they were like, what are we going to do about health insurance? I mean, think about all of the friction and businesses that never got a chance to get started because people were afraid to change jobs.
Right.
And this is a massive impediment to our economy. And so if we can get health insurance to people independent of your job, it would liberate so many people from a lot of jobs that people have been looking for a way out of for years, but then just shrugged and said, well, I have to stay here for the health coverage.
Let's shift to you and your just gestalt, your way of thinking. I think you and I we're on the same page with most subjects, except for you have degrees and I don't, but I still am pragmatic, and I would consider you would consider yourself just pragmatic, right? Like, let's just look at the data and make a decision based on the data, right? We're living in a world where politicians are talking about good vibes a lot, but my feeling is what works, what doesn't work. Let's just do analysis of it and then just implement it. Is that where you're coming from?
That's a pretty good summary, Adam. Thank you. I appreciate the characterization a great deal.
Well, look, I've heard you interviewed a few times, and my thing is, if somebody says, I'm all for the Green New Deal, but I'm against nuclear power plants, and I'm for children's education, but I'm against charter schools and vouchers, I go, I don't think you're being intellectually honest. I think if you'd like to clean up the environment, that the fourth generation nuclear power plants are a great alternative. And if you really just look at the data, you'll arrive at that conclusion. Thoughts?
Well, I'm with you on both of those fronts. I think climate change is a massive problem, and I think nuclear energy, particularly next-gen reactors, can be a big part of moving us forward in terms of our energy consumption. I'm for good schools for kids, and some charter schools have had excellent results. So, and I have friends who've started charter schools, and they're incredibly noble, self-sacrificing educators. So I agree with you that the data suggests nuclear power should be on the table, and that some charter schools are doing great work.
Well, here's a semi-loaded question for you. So when, like, Elizabeth Warren comes out against charter schools, and again, I don't know if it was her who said, but if she gets in charge, she's going to abolish all of them, or no nukes. Is she dumb? Is she dishonest? Does she think her constituency is dumb? Is she just pandering to them, or does she actually think that?
Well, what I've realized over time, Adam, and this has been a lot of learning over the last couple of years, is that there are answers you would make based on the merits, and then there are what you'd call political answers. And I think the simplest explanation and the right one is that a lot of politicians make political answers. And I'm going to give you an example based upon what you just said. If you come out as anti-charter, then the teachers' unions likes you more. And if the teachers' union endorses you, then that can be a very, very big political asset, because there are a lot of teachers in that union, a lot of members, a lot of people who are very politically engaged, because teachers vote, teachers organize, teachers volunteer. And so if you give the political answer, then you get political assets and help and resources.
Well, I'll take it a step further. Teachers' influence. Teachers have a whole captive young audience every single day, and those teachers get to sort of graft on some of their own personal political feelings. So not only do they physically vote, but they got a group of seniors who are going to go out and vote in 6 months or next year or the next election. So that's an important group to try to capture if you are running for anything.
Yeah, teachers are like the glue for many communities in many ways, big and small. And so you can imagine then the calculation one makes where, like, maybe you understand that it's a complicated question, but if you give the simple political answer, then that's a political win. And by the way, you're surrounded by dozens, even hundreds of staffers who are telling you what the political answer is.
Right.
because they're like, hey, you should really give this answer. Some of them might even have worked at that organization. That's a very, very common thing. Like, you might have someone on your campaign staff who literally came over from, like, a teachers union who's meant to liaise between you and that org. And so then what seems like an answer that may or may not be in keeping with the person's beliefs or the data, like, then becomes an obvious answer to give.
Yeah, I know. It's sad. And I was into you during one of the debates, I believe, and I believe it was during a debate where you just made the statement, look, I don't want to talk about Trump. I don't want to get into what a bad guy he is. I just want to get into policies, good policies that'll beat Trump, not what a horrible human being Trump is. I'm paraphrasing, but I thought, yes, why doesn't everyone do that? Why is that not the tack that everyone who's running against Trump is taking? Here's some better ideas.
Well, yeah, that was something I said during a debate, and I think it is a mistake to act like Donald Trump is a cause of all of our problems and everything was hunky-dory before he came along. There have been a lot of people who have been struggling for years, have been casting about for some kind of different approach or change. And a lot of people voted for Donald Trump because he represented change versus the status quo. So what changes are we offering? What changes can you put on the table that say, look, this will actually help give you and your family a path forward, help, let's say, a manufacturing town that has gotten blasted into oblivion because we gutted their workforce and their employment bases, never recovered from the fact that we automated away hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs in the swing states. That, to me, is the right conversation. That's why I was trying to steer things. I'd like to believe that I did steer certain conversations a particular way, but the rubber's going to hit the road in terms of the race in the fall and whether the nominee acts like Donald Trump is the problem or whether the problems run deeper than his presidency.
One of the things you said was that, and it's something I've always said, is that it's not so much the schools as it is the home and the community where these kids come home to chaos, especially in some of these areas. I believe there's post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, if you're living in an area where you're hearing gunshots at night, where does doing homework fit into that whole schedule? Or what about if you have a mom that's working 3 jobs or what have you? Like how can we have a good school system when home is chaos? And why don't we see if we can focus a little more on what's going on at home versus what's going on at school? Because if you have a bunch of traumatized kids from chaos showing up every day, if in fact you can get them to show up, how are you supposed to teach these kids when they're essentially trauma survivors?
You sound like a parent, Adam. I mean, I know you are. I'm a parent too, and we know how important what goes on in the home is. Educators know this too, and the data says the exact same thing. The data says that 2/3 of our kids' performance in school is determined by what happens out of school. That's words read to the child when they're young, stress levels in the house, parental income, parental time spent with them, stress, like type of neighborhood.
Sure.
So one of the reasons why we're all getting so frustrated is we keep pumping money and resources into institutions and saying, hey, why isn't this institution working? Where if you talk to any teacher and you said, hey, why is this not working? They'd look up and say, I can control approximately 1/3 of this kid's educational performance and outcome. And the other 2/3 happens at home. And so instead of having more consultants try and figure out why the school's not working, we should be trying to figure out how to improve their home life. And some of the stats that haunted me when I was researching the ideas of the campaign was that 40% of American kids today are born to single moms. It's up from like 15% when you and I were kids, Adam.
Sure.
And you see that, and I had to triple check that stat. I was like, 40%, that doesn't seem right, but it is right. And obviously there are many, many super heroic single parents. Something like 90% of single parents are single moms. When you talk about a single parent, it's generally a single mom. I mean, there are obviously many, many superhuman single parents. But at the same time, as a parent myself, you can see clearly why the data shows that it's much harder for a kid coming out of a single-parent household to have certain positive things happen to them throughout their life, like educational achievement, work, income, all the things that you're trying to hope for your kids. It's just a lot harder if they're coming out of certain households. So we need to dig deep and figure out what's going on in the home and with our families and not think that our schools are cure-alls, because the data says that our schools can do about 35% of the job.
Well, look, I've been talking about this for as long as I remember because I hosted a show called Loveline for 10 years, so I talked to screwed up kids. And the mom and dad have to hang out and raise the kids. The reason it's happening, if you want to know why it's happening, is we have erased the social stigma to being a single parent raising a kid. People used to worry about how that looked. They worried about appearances. People stayed together. Guys were sort of shamed into doing the right thing, just like you're shamed into picking up your dog poop when you walk through a neighborhood. If you walk through a neighborhood that's nice and your dog takes a dump on the lawn, you got to pick it up. If you walk through a neighborhood where there's dog shit everywhere, then you don't have to pick it up. And we stop the social shaming of this. No politician's ever going to get into it. I'm 1,000% right. It's all about the family. It's all about the dads hanging in. We kind of declared a weird war on dads, or decided they didn't matter, I think, somewhere in the 90s. But either way, dads are super important. No one wants to discuss it. And then if you really want to distill down and drill down on it, as you get into certain ethnicities, the problem gets worse. And then the politicians really don't want to talk about it because they're called racist for discussing a very deep issue and problem in some communities, and they don't want the finger pointed at them.
Well, I certainly think that social attitudes are part of it, but I'm the numbers guy. I'm like the math candidate. And a lot of it is that it's gotten harder and harder for a lot of men, particularly working class men, to have a stable source of income that can help provide the foundation for like a middle class upbringing. And this is in the numbers, where a lot of the jobs we've gotten rid of over the last number of years in this country were jobs that high school graduates could occupy and have a stable life. Think about manufacturing jobs like 20 years ago, where you didn't need a degree. You just needed to have a good attitude and be able to work hard. And then if you had a union job in one of these factories, you might make 17, 18, 20 bucks an hour. You do that 35, 40 hours a week. Then you come home, and then there's a nuclear family. Like there's at least one pillar of it.
Yeah, but
then what's happened over this last number of years is that that stable incomes have disappeared for a lot of people. And then if there are human beings in that set of circumstances, they'll occasionally, hook up and have a kid. But then the woman looks at the guy and is like, well, you're not bringing anything into this because you don't have a paycheck. And then the guy is, like in a spot where, and I think you and I would agree on this, like if you're a guy, like you feel like part of your role is to try and provide economically. And if you're not doing that, then, you feel like you're not carrying your weight.
Yeah, but I feel like the flaw in your numbers argument is it's actually easier to live with somebody, and financially you're better off staying together. I mean, even if you both have bad jobs or he still has his one bad job, I still feel like you're better off financially and you have a better chance of pulling yourself out of poverty if you keep a family intact.
Well, by the numbers, you're right. If you keep the family intact, then your chances improve. But I'll share something personal. Is that like after my first son was born, and it turns out my first son's on the autism spectrum. He's a very, very difficult kid, but we didn't know that at the time. And just the levels of stress in your household are so high during that period. Yeah. It's one reason why I'm for essentially free marriage counseling for anyone who wants it, or couples counseling. It's like if you want to stay together and you actually have your shit together to a point where the two of you will show up someplace and like try and work on that.
Yeah.
Then we should be bending over backwards to try and help you, because like the positive impact of you guys staying together, like you just said, like really significant.
Yeah.
And I think that if you throw that crazy level of stress in a household and then economic stress on top of it, and then like people looking around and be like, well, like I'm not bringing anything to this equation, and it's like my presence here is not really, it doesn't seem to be a positive. Like then I think you wind up with families that don't stick together that might have survived if you changed a few things about what was going on in that household.
What do you think about minimum wage?
Well, I'm for, as you know, this dividend that just puts money into people's hands. Like, I understand 100% the argument, like, look, if you're working full-time, you should not be dirt poor. Like, there's something wrong with that. But I think the higher minimum wage assumes that a lot of small businesses are made of money and they can just pay people $15 an hour and it has no impact on their business. And I know a lot of small businesses where that would actually be a significant problem, where, they're barely scraping by. They're barely paying themselves. If they have a staffer, or a clerk or someone, they're getting paid, let's call it $9 or $10 an hour. And then if you said, hey, you're paying $15 an hour now, they'd cut back on shifts. We have to try and make it easier to start a small business in this country, not harder. If I were to have a minimum wage, it would be scale sensitive and say, look, if you're Amazon, sure, maybe you should be paying people more. But if you're like the small mom and pop shop just trying to make ends meet, we should not be making your business harder to run. We should be trying to make it easier if we can. That's one reason why I think putting money into consumers' hands in the form of this dividend is such a win, because a lot of that money would go right back into small businesses and help their bottom line, not hurt it.
How did you calculate the $1,000? Like, you're talking about big tech companies and your information and reimbursement essentially for them profiting off of your information. Was there a calculation made? How did we arrive at $1,000?
Well, the $1,000 was arrived at independently. There was a plan proposed by a guy named Andy Stern and then studied by the Roosevelt Institute that said $1,000 a month for everyone. And that amount made sense to me because it pushes you up to a point that's a little bit below the poverty line. So it's not like, oh, my SIP came in like $1,000 a month. Like, it's enough to make a big difference for a lot of Americans, but it's not enough where people just want to kick back.
Yeah, but as a numbers guy, when you're saying the tech industry is profiting off your information, what if the tech industry says, yeah, we average $28 a month worth of profit off of everyone's information, not $1,000?
Oh, and that estimate, it's closer to, right now it's not at $1,000 a head for each of us. It is for some of us. Like, Adam, yours is probably worth more than that. Because what's interesting is your data is actually worth more depending upon who you are. If you travel a lot, which I imagine you do,
yes,
your data is worth more. If you have health problems, your data is worth a lot more.
Really?
So there's certain Americans, like, because you're going to end up consuming a lot of services, and your data might be valuable on a couple of fronts. So there are certain variables that make it that your data could be worth more than $1,000 a month. On average, is it worth $1,000 a month society-wide right now? No, it is not. Like, could it be worth that at a certain point in the not-so-distant future? Yeah. And one of the interesting things is that your data is actually worth more if you're a willing participant. Because right now, a lot of the data that gets sold and resold is anonymized. So it says, like, hey, you're a 45-year-old male, you live here, blah, blah, blah. But if you were to turn the dial up and say, like, hey, it's actually me, like, then your data is actually worth more on that basis. So there are a lot of variables. Right now, it's not worth $1,000 a head. But can we imagine a world where it is in the future? Yeah, you very much can.
All right, so let me just circle back one more time. Address this. If you have no insurance or no health care, then your $1,000 goes directly to that cause until you get it, and then you get insurance. I'll give you an example. I owed the government, the IRS, $5,000 a million years ago when I was struggling. At some point, I got a job writing a episode of Animaniacs for Warner Brothers. They paid me like $3,000. When I went to go pick up my check from Warner Brothers, they said, we don't have your check. The government took it because I owed them IRS money. Now, it's a little bit different, but if you don't have any form of health insurance, you are a burden on our society. We're giving you a free $1,000. Don't you owe it to society to have that $1,000 each month go to remedy you not having insurance?
Well, certainly there are certain forms of insurance. I don't know what it's like in California. I think you're required to have auto insurance, as an example.
Right, or even auto insurance. Yes, you're required to have it. Would you have that discussion, or would you give that some thought, that the people who owe the IRS money, or the people who don't have insurance or have or deadbeat dads or whatever. That $1,000, you don't get that $1,000. That goes to you have to pay your debtors off with that.
Well, the most extreme example, which I've already said we should 100% dedicate the money to, is if you're incarcerated. Because it's not like while you're behind bars, like the dividend just piles up and you come out and, you got like $100K waiting for you, because we're spending much more than $1,000 a month on your incarceration.
Right.
So to the extent that there are like, massive costs associated with you right now, yeah, like the dividend ought to go to that stuff first. If we're spending, in that instance, we're spending tens of thousands of dollars a year on. Yeah, so you're being incarceration.
All right.
So if there are other instances that are similar where you're like somehow incurring significant public costs that we can identify, then yeah, I would be open to it. The issue to me is that we have to figure out a way to get you health insurance that's different than the way it's happening right now, because we're like, I'm the numbers guy. Like the numbers around our healthcare system are just out of control. We're spending $3.6 trillion a year, twice as much as other developed countries, worse results. And the profiteering and price gouging on the parts of the drug companies, the private insurance companies, and the device manufacturers are staggering. Like, if you look at them, you're like, what is going on in this industry?
But it's still
it's
not...
It's largely because the government is just completely absent, and the healthcare companies are essentially naming their own prices and rates.
I get it, but I still say at some point you have to pay money for health insurance. And I, as a person who's going to donate my $1,000 to some charitable organization, would like people who don't have insurance using some of that to pay for their insurance. You think about it.
Yeah, that's very sensible, especially right now in this country where we have tons of people who are uninsured.
Right.
That to me is it's one of the biggest structural problems we face, is trying to both expand coverage, rationalize costs, change incentives within the system. It's 18% of the economy. So when some of the candidates talk about essentially legislating away private insurance, like I think that would be an epic disaster in real life if you were to do it. You have to try and make changes to the system while not completely disrupting everyone's day-to-day lives and coverage that people, in many cases, negotiated for or pay a lot of money for.
I want to talk about some of the folks that are still in the running over here, and I just want to get your sort of, thumbnail sketch. You've spent some time with these people. You've studied them more than I have. What do you think? What do you think about Bernie Sanders? He seems to be the front runner now. Do you think the Democratic Party doesn't want that?
It's really interesting. So I'm already on the record. I supported Bernie in 2016. I thought he had the most effective diagnosis of some of the problems. Like, I ran this time because I thought we needed a different set of solutions. But Bernie's a very, very sincere, compelling messenger. He's like Bernie backstage. Like, he's the same guy.
Right.
Obviously. I remember after one debate, he put his arm around me, and I thanked him he told some journalist that he liked me, and then he was like, "Of course I like you, Andrew. You bring a lot of good ideas to the table." I have to say, I felt like my uncle
right.
just congratulated me on something. So he's through and through the messenger he seems to be, and I think that's why people gravitate towards him, because they sense he's sincere.
Oh no, 100%. Like, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are as far apart as any candidates could ever be, or politicians could ever be. But I think what's attractive to half the country and then attractive to the other half of the country is they both have this what you see is what you get kind of mentality. Whereas, like, with Biden and Elizabeth Warren, I can't really tell. I feel like they're putting on a veneer or facade, and I think that's part of the problem with them sliding. I think we're now in some sort of reality TV world where we want to know who the person is, even if we don't agree with them. I disagree with many things Bernie says. I like him better than Biden, and I like him better than Elizabeth Warren because I feel like he's completely sincere.
Yeah, he is sincere, and I agree with you that many Americans feel similarly, where it's like, well, I know where he stands. He's honest. That goes a very long way in 2020.
Do you think he's going to be the nominee?
You'd have to call him the front runner right now. I mean, he's essentially won the first two states. He's almost certainly going to win Nevada this weekend. And I think, so you'd have to call him the front runner for sure.
Do you think the Democratic Party wants him there in the lead?
I think there are many people who are not excited about it. And you're seeing them cast about for alternatives or an alternative to try and counter his growing popularity. That's, to me, one of the great questions about the next several months. And it's going to culminate this summer at the convention. There's a chance that no candidate has the majority of delegates necessary to become the nominee going into the convention, and it still needs to get hashed out. Even Bernie's victories, you have to say that he's winning with, let's call it 25, 26, 27% of the vote, and you're going to need 51% of the delegates at the end of the day.
I'm going to tease this because I got to do a quick spot, but some discussion or rumors about you running for mayor of New York. So I'll let you think about that for a second. First, I'll tell you about Simply Safe. Your local police probably get 100 calls a night from burglar alarms. The majority of the time, they don't know if it's real. Simply Safe, with two eyes, is different. If there's a break-in, Simply Safe uses video evidence to give police an eyewitness account. They can tell the police where the intruder is and if they're armed and all the official particulars. And that means they dispatch up to 350% faster. Comprehensive protection, outdoor cameras and doorbells, plus entry, motion, and glass break sensors, all monitored 24/7 by live security professionals. Set it up yourself, no tools needed, or they can do it for you. Only 50 cents a day with no lock-in contracts. It's Simply Safe, right, Dawson?
Go to simplysafe.com/Adam today and get a free Simply Safe security camera, normally $100. Go today and it's free. It will help you capture crucial evidence for the police and get 350% faster dispatch. Go to simplysafe.com/Adam.
All right. So you and your future in a possible mayor of New York run, what do you think?
Well, I've thought about it, Adam, but I think my flagship proposal in my mayoral campaign would be getting James Dolan to sell the Knicks. I think I could win on that alone. It's been such a freaking tragic comedy what's going on with my formerly favorite team over the last that was like almost 20 years of counting. It's crazy. It's flattering to be considered for that race. I've said that I'm more attracted to high-impact executive roles than I am legislative roles, and certainly being mayor of New York would fit into that. So certainly wouldn't rule it out.
All right, I'm going to take that as a yes. Here's an overall bigger picture that's kind of vexing me, and you must give it some thought as well. Here we are in this information age. Everyone has a smartphone. Everything that's ever been recorded in human history is findable on the smartphone. You take something like nuclear power and you just start crunching the numbers and you realize what they're doing in Europe with it and so on and so forth. And you go, okay, that makes sense. And then somebody drops the phrase, no nukes. And most of society says, yeah, I'm with that guy who just made up those two words or took those two words and combined them together because they both start with the same letter. What is going on? Why aren't we smarter? Why aren't more people just looking at the data? Why are we not evolving faster? Is it one small group who are evolving immensely at hyperspeed and another group that's like regressing? Or What is going on? Why is this happening? Why isn't someone like Andrew Yang? Like, I see a guy like Andrew Yang and I go, that guy, just the facts, just the numbers. He's completely sincere. Maybe we disagree about a couple of things, but he's intellectually honest and he's a numbers guy and he's got to run the society. And that's not about good vibes or hugging it out or we're stronger together. That's all bullshit. He looks at numbers and he makes decisions. Why are we not more attracted to that in 2020?
Well, there are a few things at work, and it's something that I've dug into too because, for example, it's not like our test scores have been trending up after all these kids got access to the world's information, broadband and high-speed internet. If anything, unfortunately, the indicators are trending in a not great direction. It's like, to your point, it's like, are we getting smarter as a result of all this info? It's like, not really. If anything, we might be heading towards having shorter attention spans, being more anxious and depressed. There's a guy named Jaron Lanier who said something I thought was really powerful, and he's one of the pioneers of the internet. He said that negative sentiment and ideas spreads more powerfully on the internet than positive sentiment and ideas. And that, to me, is some of what you're seeing with when you said, like, hey, here's a bunch of facts and figures about nukes or nuclear power, and then you have no nukes. And, like, the no nukes message spreads more virally and is more evocative, more powerful, that the analytical part of our brains is often outweighed in many, many people by emotional responses and tribal responses. And so you have many, many more people responding to emotional appeals than you do data-driven analyses. And that's one reason why you're not seeing us come together around consensus solutions that the data suggests we should be implementing. Instead, we're devolving into my camp thinks you're bad. You said this word. No, my team's always right. This is unfortunately as big or bigger a part of human nature as the Spock rational, hey, this is where the numbers are driving us, we should all do that. And that's one of the things I'm proud of about my campaign is I feel like our campaign helped activate a lot of people who are very frustrated by the political discourse because it seemed to be going more on vibes and feelings and less facts and figures.
Well, can I float this theory? I know you're a fan of like vocational training and things of that nature, that it's not all about going to high school, being a crappy student, and just getting pushed out into society without any real training, any skill set to fall back on. That happened to me many years ago. I just got pushed out of high school. I didn't have any skill set at all. I was essentially unemployable and figured it out over the years, but I would have been better off learning pipe fitting or being an electrician or learning how to do underwater welding or something when I was in high school than just a bunch of basic courses and then pushed out into society. Tell me what you think of this theory. I've always worked with my hands, and I think the guys who work with their hands, the guys who do building, and the guys who have to get in and fix automobiles and do things of that nature, more tactile nature, they seem to be more in touch with reality because their livelihood kind of is based on a reality. If you build, if you're an engineer, if you're doing construction, if you're building homes, it's all gravity, it's all practicality, and it's all very tactile, and you have to make sense. As we drift away from those kind of jobs, loggers and farmers and builders and guys who work at sawmills and horseshoers and manufacturers, and we start to drift into this digital world, I feel like we're now losing touch with the reality that was a daily lesson for us when we went to work building homes every day or building bridges or manufacturing something. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I wish that we had more Americans getting trained in vocational apprenticeship tracks, going in and building things, taking them apart. One of my goals as president was to team up with Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs and say these jobs are awesome. We need more people doing them. Like, our country used to be great at building things, and now we're terrible at it. And I agree with you that there's a lot of objective truth behind trying to get the engine to work or trying to get the bridge to stay up, where if the engine doesn't start or the bridge doesn't stay up, you can't be like, well, I was still right. It's like, you were objectively wrong. There's like a set of facts that you had no choice but to, accept. And for many Americans now, like, there's a feeling that if I don't like the facts, then maybe I can avoid them.
Well, it's like you rebuild the engine, you put the engine back in the car, you try to start it, and it doesn't work, and you can't say it's because the transmission hates me. Or is discriminating against the engine. You have to just figure out what you fucked up, pull the engine back out, and fix it. There is no other. There's nothing else at play, and that's a reality that helps people think a little more clearly. And I do feel as we drift into the digital world, many people are losing their compass a little bit, and that's when you have Elizabeth Warren come up there and she goes, well, when I choose my Secretary of Education, I'm going to have a young girl who's transitioning vet her or him first before. And it's like, that kind of crazy talk only comes from a compass that's spinning around because you've been living in a crazy digital world. That doesn't come from folks that do real work for a real living. And yet it seems to resonate with a lot of Americans who are also have a compass that's spinning around like they're flying through the Devil's Triangle.
Well, one of the things as a parent that I am concerned about, and you probably heard me speak about it, is that a lot of the social media apps and smartphone adoption has gone hand in hand with anxiety, depression, antisocial indicators and behaviors among teenagers in particular. It's like pretty much lockstep with the adoption of smartphones. And, obviously you love technology, like think it's awesome, but also we don't really know, or we do know, unfortunately, increasingly, that some of these technologies are affecting people's brain wiring in ways that aren't wholly positive. So you're contrasting the analog world and the digital is one thing. I think the nature of people's work is another. I think changing socialization patterns. There are a lot of things that are all tying together. But one of the frustrations I had throughout my campaign that made me 100% sure that my campaign was vitally necessary was that when I would put facts out there to journalists, they would almost never engage with the facts.
Right.
Like there was never like an interest in being like, oh, really? Like that's a fact? Like let's figure that out. Like it's just this constantly buzzing news cycle of words and appearances, and no one actually is digging into the next level. It's one reason why I appreciate formats like this and podcasts and conversations where you actually can have an organic human conversation that goes for 45 minutes and an hour versus like a 6-minute cable news segment that's just going to be over before you know it.
Well, it's interesting as I think about it. If you go to the doctor says things to you that are facts. Like they go, your cholesterol's high, or you're a little overweight, or you're not exercising enough, or you're drinking too much, or whatever this thing is, or you have to have a hernia surgery, or whatever that is. And I think all of us in our 4-year-old mind want to go to a place where we go, liar, and then we just go out and eat ice cream. But we can't. He's telling us something, and it's a fact. And the facts that you give to the journalists are every bit as straightforward as a doctor saying you need hernia surgery, or you have an infection, or you need whatever. But we can't just ignore it or talk around it or sort of talk around him and then move on. It's a fact. And to me, facts are facts. When you're talking about nuclear power, it's a fact. When the doctor's telling you you have to lose 20 pounds or your cholesterol's too high or whatever it is, that's a fact as well. I don't know why we ingest different facts different ways. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think many of us, particularly, and this is like a lot of the politicization where there are certain people that want a certain picture presented or a point of view. And the reason I ran was that the facts I saw on the ground are really discouraging. It's like if you look and say, like, wow, we have record high substance abuse, suicides, mental illness, medical bankruptcy, anxiety, like pretty much anything you can think of that's bad, we have record highs. We have record low rates of business formation among young people and getting married and having kids, like which I would say are generally things you'd be like excited to see more of that are now at record lows. Like the facts are really nasty, and to me, that what was missing in our politics were Democrats, aside from like possibly Bernie and a couple of the other candidates, but just acknowledging just how nasty the facts look and not acting like if we can just push the pendulum back the other direction, then all goodness will be restored. Like that to me was the wrong approach. And that was a numbers driven analysis, really. Like if the numbers looked great on the ground, I'd be like, all right, like that's cool, but they look terrible. They're trending in really almost unprecedented ways. Like it's not normal for a developed country's life expectancy to go down 3 years in a row. Like that's not normal shit. And the fact that wasn't a giant red flag to our political establishment and our media just blows my mind. It's like, what's more fundamental than people dying earlier?
Right.
So stuff like that, like it just drives me up a wall. Like I'm optimistic that we can keep pushing like a fact-based discussion because many Americans, I think, have been very eager for it. But it has been almost mind-blowing to me how people are willing just to brush facts under the rug if they don't like them.
Well, I have two final questions for you, Andrew. And yes, anyone who's ever been to a marriage counselor, you go in thinking, oh, I got a bunch of facts. We're going to straighten this out lickety split. And then you realize facts don't mean anything if the other person in the room's not interested in facts. But for you, I want to know what you think. You were talking about all this screen time, digital stuff, and kids are getting unhappy. What are some of the things you do, and you suggest your family do to alleviate this? Is it hikes? Is it classical music? Is it saunas? Is it cold dunks? Like what exercise? What's the regimen for you, and what do you want for your family?
Well, first, let me say, Adam, I'm not exactly the perfect role model, particularly where my boys are concerned. They do have access to iPads and whatnot. It makes me feel shitty sometimes when I see them. But the fact is, when they're on their iPad, half the time I'm like responding to shit on my smartphone.
Yeah, of course. I'm the same way.
But on a personal level, I went for a hike yesterday, getting some kind of exposure to nature and getting some form of exercise, trying to clear your head, having at least a period of a few hours where if the phone buzzes, you're not going to be notified by it. These are some things that I do. And if you look at households that are most diligent about trying to circumscribe technology for kids, it's a lot of the families who actually work in tech. They're the most mindful because they kind of know what went into these things.
Right.
But I certainly would not say I'm an ideal role model. I do my best to try and clear my head and get the blood pumping. And I'm trying to get my boys to head the same direction. So one of them's in karate. We're trying to keep them very active
and engaged. And what about, last question. I am with you. I am confounded that so many people have decided to get away from facts and just go more about feelings. I worry. It doesn't give me hope for the future. I also do know that this country has a way of going from glam rock to to grunge music. So we will swing. We'll swing from, Creedence Clearwater Revival to disco and Donna Summer. Like, we will go the other direction. Do you have hope that we'll swing back the other direction and start heading toward a fact-based society versus I know what I know in my heart, even if it's wrong and you can't tell me otherwise?
Yeah, I have some confidence that this hunger that you and I share is actually just growing more and more obvious and serious all the time. You can see it in part in the success of my campaign, where it came out of nowhere and we did pretty well. I had almost 500,000 donors, mailing list of millions. And we were calling this in some ways the revolution of reason, Adam. I feel like the revolution of reason is not going anywhere. And now we have this real base of support that we can build off of in the weeks and months to come, because it's so vital and it's so missing from our politics today. I see it as kind of this third way, this, you might call it centrist or maybe independent or rationalist. But there are millions of Americans who feel the same way that you just expressed.
Yes.
And so I believe that we are just going to grow in strength over time and hopefully transform our politics, because facts are stubborn things. And after you can actually get people to listen and absorb, like, it's very hard to unlearn the truth after you've been exposed to it. You know what I mean? Like, if someone says something to you that you find shocking and it's a fact, and then you go look it up and you're like, well, that was right.
No, I completely agree.
To do that.
And, and overall, I think, I got to you through Tucker Carlson. I know many people would think, well, Andrew Yang and Tucker Carlson can't be friendly. They're sort of on the other side of the political aisle. But Tucker's a great guy and you're a great guy. Why shouldn't you and Tucker have a friendly relationship?
Yeah, I think that this idea that somehow, like, people who might have disagreements can't talk to each other is such horseshit.
It's total horseshit.
And that somehow sitting with someone is going to get infected by some, I don't know, attitude or belief. I enjoyed sitting down with Tucker. I enjoy sitting down with lots of different people who I'm sure disagree with me in some respects, but we're all human beings. We're all Americans. We're all just trying to do the best we can for our families and our country. And that, to me, is a much, much bigger deal unifying us than whatever we might disagree on.
A positive note to go out on, you can shoot him a tweet at Andrew Yang. Andrew, any place I can send people if they want to keep up with you?
Yeah, social media for now. We should have some announcement about the new direction in the next number of days or weeks. If you want to see all of the policies, yang2020.com is still up, but Andrew Yang on most social media, you can find me, and would certainly love people's support trying to move this country in a better direction.
Well, thanks, Andrew. I hope when you make your new announcement for your new direction, you come back on and share it with us.
I would love that, Adam, and I appreciate this conversation a great deal.
Thank you. Andrew Yang, everybody.